Nobody thinks, I want to be the kind of dad tonight who yells their kids to bed. But so many of us do that because of our instinctual responses to the mess and the chaos.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me back.
You mentioned a lot about broken windows and broken stuff
right.
and drywall holes.
That's right.
Glad you're part of the club.
Well, I think I mentioned last time we moved into a new house about a year and a half ago, and by the end of, I think, 7 months, we had 7 holes in the drywall, 1 broken window. So the big mess is somewhat autobiographical for us.
So being dads here at the table, I got to ask you, what's the biggest mess you remember your 4 boys doing to the house?
Oh my gosh.
What? You have to think about it. That's good.
I have to think about it. I mean, the huge hole in the drywall, the second, I think, week we moved in was a big one because they were just chasing each other upstairs, rammed through a door. And, it's my beautiful new house we had just bought, and the doorknob goes straight through the drywall. And so that one, kind of hit me hard.
That's
and then
good.
I remembered, this is easy to fix. This is easy to fix. That's what I try to remind myself.
That's such an important lesson for dads right there. So,
one of the things that I think about a lot, and I actually wrote this as the inscription in my parenting book, Habits of the Household, that it's better to raise whole children than to repair broken men and women.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when I think about the mess in the household, and this goes for the conflict and the mess, it's helpful to remember that your real job here is relationships. Your real job is raising kids who have whole relationships.
Now, you don't just come out of the womb knowing that.
No.
How did you learn that this was the priority? Because we dads, breaking stuff around the house, it's spilling on the carpet. I remember meeting a man, it was a part of his testimony through the Resilient Kids program that we have in public schools. And he said, I just didn't know how to be a dad. When my daughter spilt the milk, all I knew to do was to spank her. And going through the program, he said, I realized that you show grace and forgiveness.
Yes. So this was my entry point to writing about parenting, and is also the reason why I came to write The Big Mess. It's because, one night I'm putting my 4 boys to bed. And putting 4 boys to bed is exactly what you think it's like, right? Just total chaos. It's a total mess. But that mess is always the guise of also the relational mess, because there's bathwater on the floor. I'm frustrated. I remember yelling my children to bed and then saying, God loves you and so do I, and close the door, like short prayer. And I was standing in the hallway. I was an author and a lawyer already. I'd written a book about spiritual habits and how they shape our spirituality. And I'm thinking, I also have this other habit of yelling my kids to bed every night. And that was the time where I started to think, oh my goodness, I've got to get better at dealing with the relational mess in the house. Because otherwise I'm going to become the dad who's always trying to yell them into good behavior. And guess what? That doesn't work. And they're going to remember me as somebody who just cared about getting things in order rather than who I actually want to be. And that is like Jesus, who comes into the mess of our relationships as we are, and says, I love you, and I'm going to call you forward.
Yeah.
And that was the beginning of writing about Habits of the Household, which was my parenting book. And The Big Mess is really an iteration of that for children, to remind parents and kids that it's in the mess of family life that we do the wonderful thing that we're called to, and that is love God and love each other. So we got to figure out how to do that in the mess, not outside of it.
Let me ask you this, because it's really the important point. As dads and moms too, a lot of moms are listening, and this is a mom and dad show. But the idea of kind of rethinking that, there are things that we learn as children that we carry forward. It's in our DNA, literally. And then we have behavioral things that we experienced as children. So that wiring, when we get older and our kids are a little out of sorts, or they're having fun and giggling when they shouldn't be giggling, and throwing things when they shouldn't be throwing things, and we just spark up. We're like, stop that. Knock that off. Don't do that now. And then you walk away from that going, why was I so hard about that stuff? How do you replace that with thoughtful adult thinking in the moment, daddy thinking, to be able to de-escalate that and just say, I'm glad you guys are having fun. Can we now think about going to bed?
There you go. So I found in parenting in these moments that I was unable to think my way out of a problem that I didn't think my way into. I reacted to these things out of instinct. It was habit.
Yeah.
That I barked at my kids, and that nobody thinks I want to be the kind of dad tonight who yells their kids to bed. Like, nobody thinks that, but so many of us do that because of our instinctual responses to the mess and the chaos. And I found that fighting habit with habit was actually a grace, where the Lord, you sort of invited me to see that, hey, you can actually plan out ahead of time. So here's some ways I might respond to this. And one of the huge ones for me, and I recommend this with parents trying to help their kids reconcile and moments of discipline, huge habit that helped me is the habit of pause prayers. Where so before I go into, I need to address this moment, discipline or something happens, just very briefly, and I'm talking very, very briefly, just pray.
Yeah.
Just literally say, Lord, help me be more like you than me in this moment, okay? And so
it's a good start.
Yeah, and I mean, it sort of seems basic, like, pray, right? Well, that's because prayer is powerful. But on the other hand, you're fighting habit with habit because you're practicing a new way of interrupting your old habit and then going through do a different route. And so this is addressing the way God made your body and brain to say, I want to be somebody different in moments of discipline. And pause prayers have been enormously helpful for me.
In that regard, temperaments of children are very different. And our 2 sons were very different. I'm sure you see that with your 4 sons.
Yes.
I had the hardcore guy who could not be told anything.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had the really tender guy that if you looked at him wrong, he melted.
That's right.
And the point I want to make is a serious one, because I think a tender-hearted child, shame is so easily applied to themselves.
Yes.
When you're correcting their behavior, you have to go out of your way to say, now, I'm not speaking about who you are and how God made you. It's just what you did.
That's so good.
Was unacceptable. Creating moments, and again, I'm not, everybody can create these moments, but you need to be mindful of it. I think as a dad, I was pretty mindful about trying to be on top of those moments. You never know when they're going to spark. It could be on the way to a camping trip, whatever. And I used to talk
for us,
to,
it's like hourly.
It's all. I used to talk to Jean about that because she was much more into formal devotional time with the kids. Start at 7, go to 7:30, and that's good. You need structure. I was more like in the car, talking stories.
Yeah.
But in that regard, you and your son, you had a story about playing the guitar, and having a chit chat.
Yeah.
But how did that go down? How old was your son when this happened?
Well, this is a recent story, actually. So he's 13 when that happened.
13?
And I think about that because I've thought a lot about those structured times in the younger years, how you structure moments to come out of family devotion or to come out of nighttime prayer. And it's so, so helpful for the younger years.
Both are good.
Oh, so wonderful. But as kids get older, and most parents intuit this, it becomes a little more free form. What you're trying to do, and this is what I think about a lot, right? I'm learning about it right now, is structuring space instead of structuring content. So in the younger years, and we still do this because I still got a 6 and an 8-year-old boy in the house, we're structuring a bedtime liturgy, a bedtime prayer, and everybody's doing a family devotion once a week, as messy as they are. But recently, I'm finding with my 13-year-old, if I really want him to engage, what I need to do is structure space and time for him to engage. So recently, I was trying to pull some information out of him because I heard from another dad that something had happened to school, and I'll respect privacy by not saying what that was. It wasn't too bad, but I was like, I want to talk to him about this. And I asked him, at family dinner, hey, did anything happen at school today? It was nothing. And then that night, I was like, hey, you want to stay up late and play the guitar together? He was like, yeah. So he's learning, and I play at an amateur level, and we're both just like plucking and trading ideas. And about half an hour in, he kind of like rests his hand on the guitar and he says, hey, can I tell you something? And I was like, sure. And we talked about it. And it was exactly what I was hoping. And, every time doesn't work this well, right? But structuring space where we could be kind of side to side looking at something else. This could be a walk or a hike or throwing the baseball or football, playing guitar. But I find with the older boys, structuring spaces where they get pulled out into those intentional moments of conversation.
I think that's really good. And, unfortunately, I don't know that we as parents appreciate differences that way. And I think for spouses, we need to appreciate God bringing you together as a couple, then you have children.
Yes.
And use both of your strengths
yes.
to do the things that really help your children to thrive.
And I think we see both reflected in the life of Jesus. I mean, he walks with his disciples and talks and talks and talks. And then he also sometimes just teaches. And both are super valid ways But you've got to be a student of your child as a parent.
Justin, you mentioned liturgies. This is something I'm really kind of learning about. What's an example? Give us a demonstration or tell us a little bit about a liturgy at bedtime.
Sure, yeah. This actually comes from the story I mentioned earlier where I was wrestling with the chaos and the mess of bedtime and realizing that I was as misbehaved as everybody else because I'm reacting to the chaos with such anger. And I think of liturgies as things that we do over and over, in church services or quiet times, semi-consciously to unconsciously. Like many of us could close our eyes and recite the Lord's Prayer and not think about it at all. But we're formed by it, right? So it's not necessarily a problem that it's semi-conscious to unconscious. And when I think about that, I had the epiphany at some point as a writer on habit that this is almost identical to the definition of habit. Habits are things we do over and over, semi-consciously to unconsciously, and they shape who we are big time. The big difference is that liturgies admit they're about worship. Habits often obscure what we worship, but that doesn't mean we're not worshiping, right? Our ordinary household routines are filled with moments of worship. The question is just to what? And I realized that my quote unquote liturgies of bedtime were odes of worship to rush and control and hurry up and let me relax, just go to bed. And so when I got convicted about that one night after yelling my boys to bed, I decided, let me do some intentional work and try to reshape this moment. So we wrote a bedtime liturgy.
You wrote one?
Yeah. It sounds more formal than it is. It was just a series of back and forth little questions. I would say, do you see my eyes? And the boys would say, yes. I'd say, you see that I see your eyes? They'd say, yes. Do you know that I love you? Yes. You know I love you no matter what bad things you do? Yes. You know I love you no matter what good things you do? Yes. And then I'd end with, who else loves you like that? They'd say, God does. Then I'd say, rest in that love. It sounds sentimental. First time it was total chaos.
Daddy loves me.
They say, do you see my eyes? And they'd start poking each other in the eyes. And I asked them, do you know that I love you no matter what bad things you do? They thought hard and were like, no, right? No, because we need to behave for you to love us, right? It was terrible. But through practice, we kind of got it down.
Yeah.
And it happens a lot less formal than you think. But the neat thing was a couple weeks later, we practiced this every evening. And I had a moment where just as chaotic bedtime as normal, but I realized I was way different because I was driving towards a different habit. And it had reshaped my interactions. And we had this beautiful exchange about the grace of Jesus who loves us in the midst of our mess, our bad and good deeds. And that was a light bulb moment for me, that you could look at household routines and approach them intentionally, and that the most ordinary things like waking or sleeping or moments of discipline could become spiritual liturgies to the God who actually loves us in the mess. And a lot of my parenting and writing since then has been about that.
No, that's so good. And your children, they're blessed to be in that household, actually. You think about it. The children's book, The Big Mess, I think lends itself to solving sibling rivalry.
Yeah.
I mean, you got the mouse and the moose,
Yes.
and they're going at it. And
Yeah,
the
they're fighting.
mouse is creating these wonderful, delicious treats, and the moose, the other child, keeps knocking them over and knocking them down. Speak to that idea of how to help bring harmony into sibling rivalry. That's typical. In our case, we were really blessed. Our boys, they had their normal, skirmishes, but they're pretty limited, and they now would say they're one another's best friends. That's a good thing.
It's a beautiful thing.
But you have to be mindful of it.
Oh, yes. And I mean, this is on the first couple pages of the Bible, right? That siblings don't necessarily get along.
Yeah, no kidding.
And it can go bad. It is no guarantee that families become friends, right? And a lot of what I'm trying to do in The Big Mess is give people just a little way to think about sibling reconciliation. And because I think stories, Jim, are so important that you read over and over and you internalize them, right? And stories are powerful. And I wanted to give children and parents a little story of reconciliation so that we could both internalize that, hey, that's what families do, right? Again, the mark of a Christian family is not that you don't have conflict. It's that you reconcile. And I want kids to see that too. And so, the Big Mess is just about a big brother mouse who makes fantastic dessert creations. Think about your child who makes the Lego creations or does all the projects. Most families have one child who gets into it. And then most families also have another child who just seems to accidentally mess everything up all the time, sometimes intentionally maybe, and that's Moose. He comes in and increasingly fantastic blunders. Because remember, we're trying to keep children's attention, right? So we have desserts in this book that are crashing and smashing. Moose just accidentally messes up all of Mouse's creations. And the turn in the book comes when, after Mouse gets really, really frustrated with his brother and tries to avoid him, he finally decides, you know what if I made something that was made to be smashed? And he invites his younger brother into his creation by saying, come make a mess with me, okay? And so this is, again, supposed to be really fun with kids. So they build a huge ice cream sundae that then they launch Moose out of a slingshot. I mean, we're getting fantastic here. He lands on a seesaw, explodes the ice cream sundae, and the whole neighborhood catches ice cream, banana splits raining down from the sky.
I'd like to give that a try.
And I had a moment with my kids actually recently. This was just, I think, last week, where they were getting frustrated or fighting about something I honestly can't remember. And I said, hey, why don't you invite your little brother into it? Make it fun for him. And he literally looks at me and goes like, oh, like Mouse in the story.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my gosh, like it worked with my kids. When habits and stories go together, because we read them over and over, we do them over and over. And when you're reading kids a story over and over, they'll start to, it might take a while, but they'll start to connect. And that's why I wanted to give parents a good, fun story that their kids would say, read it again.
Yeah.
Because I want to give them internalized little heroes of reconciliation, like little examples of, I could be like that.
Yeah, that's so good. You encourage your boys to hug each other after an argument. Now, that's good, too.
Okay.
That's like saying please and thank you and sorry.
Yeah.
So how's that work?
Yeah. John asked a couple minutes ago about liturgies in the house, and we have what we call a liturgy of reconciliation. We call it the brother's hug.
Look me in the eye.
Yes. Yeah, we do. So most families, and I think this is really healthy, have a way of saying, you need to apologize, you need to forgive. And I really think that's wonderful. I think you should. But I found that often our kids, after saying, I'm sorry, I forgive you, they were looking at the ground, looking frustrated, and I thought, we're not reconciled here. So we started doing this thing where we said, hey, all right, now you need to do a brother's hug. And that's where they had to hold on to each other for as long as it takes until not one, but both of them started smiling. And very quickly, and this is for younger kids, it works the best. I noticed that it really helped them because about 4 or 5 seconds of holding on to each other, they started to get playful again. They started to wiggle. They started to wrestle. And I actually subsequently found out that holding on to another human for a hug, I think about 8 seconds, releases these brain hormones that encourage bonding.
Yeah,
there's a lot, God made the body, right? I didn't know this at the time, but it was a way for them to embody reconciliation. And it helped us so much, and it still does, because we need embodied ways to come back together in the family, embodied ways to enact what Jesus has done for us, and that is reconcile us back into his love.
Yeah, along those lines, Justin, I'm so glad you're talking about this, because we had too many situations where we would just tell the kids, work it out, right? I mean, so we want to demonstrate.
You were busy.
Well, yeah, when you get a certain number, there is chaos.
Yeah.
And so modeling grace, talk about the importance of modeling grace, because I think if I were to have a redo, I would start with a little more grace for myself. As you said, Jim, it's just too much for one person to do well, but also I'd want to help my kids do what you were describing there, hug each other and give each other some slack.
Well, and I think about this a lot. I talk to parents about it a lot. So I'll give you 3 quick habits that I actually think are incredibly helpful here. One is the pause prayers that I mentioned earlier. For you to pause and pray is extraordinarily different. It's just a different way to approach it, and it helps you re-encounter Jesus' grace before you go into that moment, okay? Then for you to help your children do some liturgy of reconciliation, figure out what helps them show grace to each other. It might be a brother's hug, or it might be a walk or something else. But I do think there's something to be said, this would be the third one, of helping them learn to work it out. So think about this as they get older. I often tell parents now, if they're, let's say 4, 5, 6, they're getting older, and you hear a fight breaking out, just wait a minute. Because you've been trained by the younger years to run in and intervene, and that's good and fine. But one of the things that we want to do is train our kids, teach them to start to learn to negotiate conflict, negotiate compromise, and forgive each other, right? And they actually need space to do that. So one of the things I do with my boys now, and I have to encourage my wife sometimes, wait, give them a second. They might work this out. And, and if it's going badly, if it's going towards, a fist fight, then obviously I'm going to run and break it up. But if it's, and this,
obviously
it happens. But But if I think, no, they're learning to work it out now, I might come up and say, hey, boys, I'm going to give you 3 minutes. I'm going to come back and I want to hear the fair, gracious compromise that you came to. And I'll look at the older one and I'll say, it has to be fair. And then I'll come back in 3 minutes and I'll say, if you didn't figure it out, I'm going to have to take the toy away or something. And I think it dignifies them with the ability to say, all right, I'm going to figure out how to solve this. And helps them learn that to give grace to the other, because somebody's going to have to give and somebody's going to have to take. And so that's just a little way of helping them learn to do it. And obviously, this is parenting, right? You're helping them along. You're walking them towards it. Mm-hmm. And, if you're not modeling it, it's not going to go well. So this could be a whole nother conversation. But if you want to think really hard about this, think about what they see when they're looking at you and your spouse. Mm. When I'm talking to Lauren, that probably the most important thing that I'm going to teach them about negotiating conflict, compromise, and being gracious is how I talked to Lauren. So I think a lot about that. When I'm talking in front of them or not, they're watching that.
Yeah, that's good. That's convicting.
It is. It is.
But it is good. And I'm thinking of the parent right at the end here, Justin, who is saying, well, and again, we can use these as excuses, but you're an attorney, you're busy, you're doing things, you're writing children's books.
Yeah.
I mean, so you've got your plate full, but you've got your eye on the right ball. So in that regard, how do we prioritize so we don't fall back on that excuse to say, I'm so busy, I don't have time to do all those things, or to be that mindful about it?
Yeah.
I think we could just do it naturally. The kids will turn out okay.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying here.
Yeah, I would remind people of just two principles. And one is to do nothing is to do everything. So that means if you're just saying, I'm too busy, I can't do that, let's let it happen naturally. Well, you're saying I'm not going to do anything, which means you're basically going to submit to the modern American culture of discipleship, which is to disciple you in this busy, chaotic, anxious churn of activity and
screen time
and not paying attention. Yeah. And so to say, I don't have time for this is to say that you do have time for someone else's discipleship. So I would admit that I'm a quote unquote busy, stressed person. I run a law practice, write books, and I came at this through failure, right? So it was by realizing that, oh my gosh, if I do nothing, I'm going to end up the angry, anxious dad who's yelling his kids to bed at night. And so the corollary principle to that is that Jesus' burden is light. And this is such good news. To say, oh my goodness, I'm going to take all these ordinary moments and let Jesus disciple them is not to say I'm going to take on 1,000,000 new tasks that are going to wear me out. No, it's the opposite. It's to say you're going to throw off the 1,000,000 old tasks that the world is asking of you and say, I'm going to take on the light yoke of Jesus and do a couple things intentionally. And guess what? The reason we call it the light yoke, the easy burden, is because he's under it with you. He's helping you. And I just want to point out that you're under somebody's yoke. You're under somebody's way of discipleship. So to do nothing is to submit to that. But to do something, it could just be a little thing, like a little bedtime liturgy, a little sibling reconciliation liturgy, reading them a kid's book at night, is to start to come under the easy, intentional yoke of Jesus. And there is not only love and reconciliation and grace, but it's also the lightness of walking with him. And that's way better than doing nothing.
That is so good. Man, I could have used that a few years ago. But I can apply it today.
It's never too late.
It's never too late.
It's never too late. People say, oh, the ship has sailed. I've already parented my kids. I got a friend in the Navy. And he tells me that when ships sail and they have a big problem, they turn around and go back to harbor. So it's never too late to do something rather than nothing.
That's a safe way to go. Hey, Justin, thanks again for being with us. This is great. And talking about a kid's book for 30 minutes, it worked out. There's a lot more in this. Yeah. But The Big Mess, a deliciously funny story of siblings learning to get along. It's a free guide on how to throw dessert around your house. It's awesome.
There you go. Yeah, your kid. I guarantee you, your kids will say, "I love it. Read it again." They might make a mess from it, but that's okay.
Yeah, read it again, Dad. Anyway, get a copy here from us at Focus on the Family. Make a gift of any amount. Join us in ministry, and we'll send you the book as our way of saying thank you for being part of the ministry.
Yeah, you can do that, and also learn about Age and Stage and other parenting resources we have for you. It's all on our website, and that link is in the description below. Or call 1-800, the letter A in the word family. And on behalf of the entire team, thanks for joining us today for Focus on the Family with Jim Daly. I'm John Fuller, inviting you back as we once again help you and your family thrive in Christ.